Well, I think it's time to start wrapping up this series that I've been doing on faith and time, kind of an odd series. And I got a little rushed, a little long in the two previous videos because when I start getting long, I start talking too fast and trying to run my ideas through too fast, and then I skip things. So I'm going to definitely divide this wind up into two parts. The first part is really, I want to try to recapture what it's like to just to have faith, to be in faith. Because sometimes I'm afraid I project the life of faith that I've devoted this whole series, all of these series to, as kind of a moralistic endeavor. And of course, doing the right thing, I think, is a vital part of living the life of faith. Faith without works is like a body without breath, saith the epistolarian James. And it's very true, but the faith comes first. The works don't prove that you have faith. You don't do works in order to demonstrate that you have faith. It's because you have faith that works naturally flow out from that core vital spark within you. So I'm going to do the first of these two wrap-ups by just trying to describe the feeling, the vital spark, which of course is impossible to do, but so let me get on before I start getting too long about it. I do want to go back and review quickly what this has all been about. The first video in this series about faith and time was one where I tried to distinguish between linear time, which is, you know, in our contemporary world, this is where we all live. We have this timeline where one event is happening after another, and some of these things we can't control, but we view them as shaping us, and to a large extent we try to choose what's going to be happening down the line. We plan our lives out, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it can be a bad thing because it draws us away from living in the now, if you want to use that Eckhart Tolle phrase, which is kind of a double-edged sword. But I've been explaining the now, or the eternal moment, as the past and the future. I don't want to exclude the past and the future. I'm not saying that the sequence of events is wrong-headed because we don't have a past and a future, or because they're irrelevant, but because where we are right now is the current expression of the past. It's the flourishing, the flowering of the past. There's an integral relationship between the two. They shouldn't be cut off. And the same with the future. The future is going to be tomorrow is going to be an expression of where you are today, if you're in the right place spiritually. This gets back to the whole thing about the body without breath. If you have that spiritual breath, then it will emanate from you in the things that you do. Let me put it this way, because I haven't used these terms before in these videos. I have used them before in other discussions. I think of the linear arrangement of time that is really how most of us attack our day-to-day lives as a kind of, call it tunnel time. It's as if we have blinders on, especially in the modern world where we're so goal-oriented and we want to set goals. I'll return to that in a minute. It's a good thing to have goals set and to go forth and try to accomplish them, but we're so very focused on getting to the next stop up the line that we forget to look from side to side, and we don't catch those, what I've called earlier, the cross currents. There are things around us that tell us that whatever we're trying to accomplish isn't really the be-all and end-all. It's not about accomplishing. It's about the truth which is now. Living in faith is to live right now in that vital spark that puts out the motivation to go forth and do those things. And in fact, I have, in other discussions, contrasted tunnel time with radiant time. The image there that I'm trying to suggest is that of a focal point. Think of the sun emanating light and heat, and our lives, of course, do move along from one day to the next, from one act to the next. We're planning. Let's get back to having a plan. We set goals. Of course, that's a good thing, but we plan our goals if we're living the good life with reference to that focal point. And we change our goals, or we adapt our goals from day to day with reference to where we are to that focal point. We're orbiting the sun. We're orbiting our faith and trying to constantly recalibrate what we're doing, where we are with respect to that truth, which is always there. Every day we should be alive to the eternal, the immutable, the unchanging source of this truth that drives us through our orbit. We shouldn't be paying attention primarily to where we are on the line. I've made 3 stops. I've got another 18 to go. I better hurry up. Let's get going. That's not, you're paying too much attention to some place that might not be at all what you think it is when you finally get there. And I talked about dead-end itineraries in an earlier segment too. It's very seldom the case that we find that our objectives are making us happy or giving us the sense of fulfillment that we thought they would. That's why we always need to recur back to the goodness, the inspiration, which comes from that higher source and is enlightening the actions that we take. That's why we can change our actions and yet remain the same. What's the same is our adoration of that center point of goodness, that central orientation. So that's the ground that I tried to cover. I also said in the immediate previous video to this one that probably not very well. That's the one I was most concerned about. I don't want people to think that when I talk about oral tradition and literate progressive culture that I'm a tree hugger. I'm not suggesting that you should go put on a loincloth and take up the bow and arrow and kneel before the sun at every dawn. Let's not go back to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But traditional people do have a keener sense of the wholeness of things. The fact that today and tomorrow are really repetitions of yesterday and the day before and the day before. There's a unity to time in their worldview, which no, it's not going to cure any diseases. It's deadly to progress. Again, I'm not suggesting that we should do away with science or that our material progress has been satanic or something. Let's not go off on that tangent at all. I'm just talking about the soul. I'm talking about how do you orbit that source, that inspiration, that focal point of goodness, which should enlighten every one of your days. That's where your life, that's where your light and where your heat comes from. That's your sun. And traditional people are more plugged into that. They seem to me to know how to live in the moment, which is right now. Let me, in fact, give a few examples and then I'll be done with this first part of my wrap-up. I think that actually art is a good way to get to this point of spiritual poise, of living in the eternal present. Because a work of art We've talked about this before in a previous video too. It does not give you a specific purpose, a specific meaning. It toys with your imagination so that you're convinced that under all the layers and behind all the shadows, there's a specific meaning, but you never really get there. And in that respect, it stands outside of time. It's one of those cross currents that sort of pulls you up short and makes you look out the window. What was that? And you can't really see how a great work of art ties into something specific and purposive that you want to get done. In a sense, great art is irrelevant. It's meaningless, a distraction. I mean, that's what you could say if you were trying to wring a profit from it, or trying to make it utilitarian, make it useful in some sense that our culture would understand. We need great art so that we will look out the window. We will notice that everything is not linear. The great work of art is always there, even though we perceive it in time, but its effect is really outside of time. It's eternal in that way. It's abiding, and that is sort of an analogy to the effect of this warmth and this goodness that I'm trying to describe that comes from spirituality. Of course, the problem is, and we did a further video on this too, the problem is that we can't access art like this any longer because our academy, our colleges and universities, our intellectuals are telling us, no, you got art all wrong. You're just buying into this mystical thing that the patriarchy has used to make you get on your knees and adore their values, and it's all about political manipulation and propaganda. All art is propaganda. It all has a specific purpose, a specific end, a place where it's trying to take you. So here we are back on the train now, going down the line to some particular destination. So if we don't have access to art in the modern world, and it's very difficult to, thank you Academy, it's very difficult to find great art today among our intellectuals. Well, let's go back to our tribesman, our hunter-gatherer. Where did he didn't really have much in the way of art, but he did have nature, and we have nature too. In fact, I think we have almost sometimes kind of an unwholesome, because we don't have art, but we transfer all that energy and all that longing for something radiant, something that abides and doesn't change. We take it out to nature, and we almost do, I think, some of us in this culture, this kind of new age religion that we have. We get on our knees and wait for the sun to come up every morning, some of us. It's not, the sun is not a god. The moon, the stars, the wind, those are such beautiful things. They're such evocative things. They speak to us of God, but they are not gods. But we, I think, profit from having them in our lives. So yeah, I think it would be a really good thing if you could take a nature hike or something, just work in your garden once in a while. Maybe this is a good point to leave off, because I'm about to get long again. But out here where we've retired, sometimes I go out in my little field that I've cleared and say it's midday, it's a beautiful clear day, the sky's blue, clear as a bell, the sun is up there, there's no breeze, the birds have stopped singing and moving about by that time of day. Sometimes I hear a turkey call off in the woods, but otherwise there's maybe a distant train whistle. And I have that feeling that time is standing still. I'll bet that maybe you've had that feeling before, and you get that sometimes in nature, that this is one moment, but it's a moment that's just growing and growing, and I'm in it, I'm in the middle of it, and it's surrounding me. You can practically feel just the circularity of it all. Well, that can be a very spiritual moment. It can induce, I think, a very productive sort of meditation. So the feeling that we want to be spiritual, truly spiritual people, the way that we want to get right with God is to find our way to that eternal moment. And then the actions that we do in our linear life are really going to be orbiting the goodness that we worship.